Good evening. Thank you very much. Um, Welcome to the Shoals Marine Lab's weekly seminar series. For those of you that are new to the Shoals Marine Lab, we are the largest and oldest marine lab that is dedicated to undergraduate education. And we think of that both in terms of coursework, but also in terms of research. The Cornell Laboratory, the Cornell University and University of New Hampshire jointly sponsor the Shoals Marine Lab. And I currently serve as the John N. Kingsbury Executive Director of the Shoals Marine Lab. We have people both in the room with us today, and we also have folks online. In addition to the guests that are joining us remotely tonight, we have 3 classes on the island right now during this first block of classes for 2026. We have field ornithology. We have field bioacoustics and soundscape ecology. And we have biological illustration. And of course, we have an amazing 2026 seasonal and permanent staff at the Shoals Lab that are here with us in the comments. Our seminars, thank you. Our seminars are affectionately called Rock Talks because back in the early days of the lab, we actually had many buildings that didn't have walls, and many of the talks actually occurred literally on the rocks. We've now moved those talks indoors, which is a little bit more comfortable, especially if we were having the rain that we had just about an hour and a half ago. But we still we talk about these as being rock talks. It kind of gives that idea of being a little bit more informal, but a lot of information that you're going to end up receiving. It gives us a chance to talk about new and emerging research topics related to the environment and to marine ecology. We are excited to welcome everyone today. The format of today's talk will be about 45 minutes of a talk given by our speaker, followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A. The Q&A function, for those that are joining us online, you can type your question in and we will read that out loud. For those of you in the Commons, we'll come around with a microphone. If you don't speak in the microphone, the people online can't hear your question. And so we want to make sure that everybody can actually enjoy that. Tonight's speaker is Andy Johnson. He received his bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from Cornell University. His honors thesis was entitled Connecting Habitats and Hemispheres, Nonstop Migratory Flights in Whimbrel. Last year, he received his Executive Master of Public Administration degree from Cornell University's Jeb E. Brooks School of Public Policy. Andy is a conservation multimedia producer, combining his backgrounds in ornithology and public policy. After studying the Hudsonian Whimbrel migration, he joined the Center for Conservation Media at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, where he worked for over a decade, building partnerships, producing short films, and coordinating campaigns to advance conservation strategies on the ground across flyways. He currently works as the senior video producer at the National Audubon Society, continuing similar strategic visual storytelling efforts across Audubon's broad network of the Americas. This evening, he will be presenting Conservation Media, Case Studies in Strategic Filmmaking for Birds. Please join me in welcoming Andy Johnson.
Thank you very much. All right, make sure this is. They're working. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. It's super exciting to be here. I'm going to dive right in because I'm trying to cram in many things that I want to show you in these 45 minutes. So I want to share, keep some time for questions. So basically, I will just sort of share some perspectives and examples of work from this kind of niche field that we're calling conservation media, somewhere between art and biology and conservation science and policy. And hopefully, over the next hour, we'll get into that strategic storytelling when it's focused and purposeful can be a very surprisingly persuasive and effective tool for solving some of these, well, whatever complex, thorny conservation challenge in your world, in your careers. So in my case, that thorny conservation challenge is really focused on curlew. And so at birds, it's going to be about birds, 12 years at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology means that this broad model was very often applied to birds for us, but in this case, I'm just going to pick a couple examples that really are about this bird from behind me, the Hudsonian Whimbrel. So these are just some of the most evocative, beautiful birds in the world as a bird. So excited to share a little bit. So my path into this rather unlikely role began very near here on the coast, or mid-coast Maine, watching birds as a really young kid. I think before I learned ornithology, I was pretty sure that I wanted to be an ornithologist. But of course, I didn't know what that meant. I did visit Saptarter Woods, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, in that second picture, I was probably in third or fourth grade, and about a decade later, ended up there as a student studying Whimbrel, like Sarah alluded to. It's that third picture in Churchill, Manitoba, the subarctic middle of Canada on the western shore today. And then just recently, the last picture, just another decade later, finally got to go back to Churchill and filming those same birds for a different project. So curlews have very much been my thread with this work, and so yeah, those will be kind of the backbone of these two case studies. But yeah, curlews, they're a vulnerable group of species. Actually, before I talk about curlews, I just video clip, no sound on this one, but this was from this past summer. Just to get a sense for the beauty of a curlew is on those pretty ground Churchill, nestled among lichens and crowberry. They kind of actually see them in Churchill. Churchill just transition zone between boreal forest and subarctic tundra. See Whimbrels in different little micro habitats on the tundra. Sometimes they're in sedge meadows and it's very grassy, and other birds neighboring are these more dry tundra. Really yeah, so this bird here is right in the center of this next graphic. There's some old slides from the old handbook of birds of the world. Hudsonian Whimbrel is one of 9 curlew species around the world. This is a group that's very prone to extinction. All of these are declining rapidly, and few of them are already taken. So them as no curlew. Our North American curlew that was one of the most northern right alongside the active hundreds of birds that with dark skies and under market hunting really just decimate these populations rapidly. There are written accounts of single bit target killing many birds, and the flocks would just turn around and come back. So this was something that alongside Patrick Whitten's Eskimo curlew was in large part hunted the bird of extinction, and then dealt with other compound threats like the collapse of grasshoppers in the Great Plains on their northward migration. But Eskimo curlews would have flown right over shoals in large numbers, the fall migration, and they would do this big loop and go north through the Gulf Coast of the Great Plains. And then slender-billed curlew was last documented in 1995 in Morocco. Back when I mentioned that Eskimo curlew was more or less gone by the early 1900s, but the last one was photographed in 1963 going north of Texas. The 3 of them were together. There's one last photograph of Eskimo curlew, and then the very last known record was from the same fall on the southbound journey about 500 Barbados, and that specimen is very last. So again, as a group, these are incredibly vulnerable birds. They're declining rapidly. Only one, the little curlew in the East Asian, Australasian flyway, is stable. And essentially, until recently, in my lifetime, Whimbrels have always been the common, stable, widespread curlew that you kind of count on being a curlew that you'll see around the world. But that's changing quickly too. Hudsonian Whimbrel are rapidly becoming a species of significant conservation concern. This Hudson Bay population that I was doing that tracking research with was right in the middle of the map there around Hudson Bay. That's the core of the breeding population that uses the flyway, so it traverses mid-Atlantic coast down to Brazil. And that entire flyway population is about 40,000 birds at the last estimate based on mid-Atlantic sites. And that's the number that represents a decline of half from just about the 1990s. And just a result of these continued declines, just this past spring, the Hudsonian Whimbrel was uplisted to Appendix 1 status in the Convention on Migratory Species of the UN body. It's considered it endangered as it was. It's really part of the broader pattern. I know Kristen talked about this today with the field ornithology class, but we've lost a billion birds across North America since 1970. And that's roughly 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 birds across species in terms of numbers of individuals. So obviously, those declines, as Kristen was saying, those declines are felt differently in different landscapes. Different packs of different groups of birds are feeling that more acutely. Shorebirds are one of the most heavily affected and vulnerable groups of birds. This is probably impossible to read from here, but in the room, but this is sort of just a graph showing the list of 4 species of the Atlantic flyway that are migratory shorebirds. You can see only a handful are arguably stable. That middle line is 0% change from 1980 to roughly present. You can see the vast majority of these birds lost more than half their number in those past few decades. So even Whimbrel over in that far left side, Whimbrel are some of the 5th bird there, roughly 80 to 90% decline over that time period. So even this bird that we've kind of counted on being around, it's especially given the relatives, really not part of the imagine. This is the bird that makes us here in our lifetime. So it's a gut-wrenching thought. And I just want to place a sort of a bookmark here, take a step back from a bigger picture, because this is a very familiar trend, whether it's in birds in North America or fisheries, we learned about the other night, and anything else. We're familiar with these problems, but how can we actually kind of begin to approach complex issues like these? And that's where I'll circle back to conservation media as what I think is the most long part of that equation. What is conservation media? Saying this, it's definitely not an industry standard thing or a generally accepted term with a definition. But we were at the Center for Conservation Media at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So this small team was really spent a lot of years working on refining and proving what this concept could and should be. And boiled down, I've kind of thought that it's essentially this phrase on screen: factual visual storytelling, designed and distributed strategically, realize target outcomes through audience of influence. So there's a lot to unpack, maybe argue about in those phrases, but that's kind of the distillation, I think, of the broadest application of this kind of working model. We start with this filmmaking toolkit, right? Filmmakers in a lot of ways, but then we're really spending a lot of our time and energy focused on building these interdisciplinary partnerships with stakeholders, subject matter experts, researchers, decision makers, and finding our place in the middle to help inform how can we most effectively bring these stories and compelling images to bear in a strategic way to actually change human behaviors or the decisions that are kind of creating that problem. So real quickly, in theory, conservation media, I think it pulls from a lot of different disciplines. It aligns itself with partners, it relies on a lot of different complementary skills and disciplines. Yeah, so it's kind of in the middle of all these things. From, it's not narrative filmmaking like the top bubble there. It's not story for story's sake. It's not journalism like the bottom bubble. It's not rigorously impartial. This is sort of a mission-oriented, purposeful, focused storytelling effort. So that's in theory conservation media. In process, it's essentially beginning with this, choose your urgent conservation dilemma and work backwards through a sort of logic model to arrive at a production plan. What are we going to film and who are we going to show it to essentially? So if we take this problem of shorebirds in decline, we know from the leading research that that's largely due to habitat loss, very big idea, and hunting, harvest pressure. So if you look at those two sort of root causes, kind of work your way through this model. And what are the target outcomes that our partners can form, are the existing strategies, the best places for focus energy, the best next step that we can go and review, do with the funding. Who is really in control of realizing that outcome? So thinking very much in a detailed way through this like backwards logical process, and really focusing on causal methods. Our partners, our stakeholder partners, are really the ones who are closest to issues, ideally trying to find those people, and they may also have that direct access to an audience. But all these things sort of shape production plan, not just in terms of messaging, the form and the design of the production of the distribution. How are we going to actually make sure that we get this in front of the eyes and ears that are that? Yeah, so I think one thing I just want to note here with this idea of it's a simple concept and model. It can be agingly complex, infinitely complex when you start, interrogating these root causes. They're all layered. What scale do you start working at? What does happen? What's the root cause of the root cause in a certain location versus another location or different socioeconomic context? And so it's been very easy to get lost in sort of analysis paralysis on these things. But I think what we've found is we're sort of building these genuine relationships with stakeholders, letting them lead the way, kind of trying to do this, bring a storytelling lens to it with humility that can adapt and recognize your missteps, your biases that you're bringing into it. The best thing here is just, go ahead, do your best, you adapt and adjust. So that's been kind of what we've been doing, what our team's been doing over the last several years, and we'll dive into two cases of this. We're coming back to this bookmark shorebird decline. We've got habitat loss as a leading factor, and we've got so on the habitat loss side, I want to talk about this project in Bank, South Carolina. So when we think about migratory shorebirds, these are birds that are ultimate marathon migrants. They, as a group, they're often from Arctic breeding grounds to the coastlines of the southern or at least equatorial regions. And so in a lot of cases, these are birds covering distances, and they're really choked by these habitat bottlenecks along the way that are intertidal zones, often threatened by human disturbance, human coastal development, sea level rise, all sorts of things. They're sort of squeezed in a very narrow and disappearing margins of habitat. The Bank was kind of the ultimate example of that for Whimbrel. It's especially for a critical halfway point between the breeding grounds and the grounds. It's this vulnerable, ephemeral, and also highly contested piece of land. Very valuable for not development, thankfully. It's not suited to development, but it's highly contested for recreation and a lot of human vegetation. But it was recently discovered that it's a critical nocturnal route to the Whimbrel, and that there are in fact so few places like the Bank. These bottlenecks are so extreme that half of the entire Atlantic flyway population would go to this one sandbar for weeks during spring migration as a nocturnal route. So you see this full moon in the background here. This was from these sort of critical nights when we were filming there, where the full moon brings the biggest spring tide. On those highest tides across that whole landscape from basically southern Georgia to northern South Carolina, this whole sweep of the coast from all the Georgia Bight. There are very few places like the Bank, and so all the Whimbrel in that massive landscape of salt marsh are converging right about this time of day. the sunset, you just see these huge flocks starting to converge. It underscores how rare these places are, how severe of a bottleneck it is. You have one little place, one piece of habitat that's responsible for the well-being of that species. A lot of eggs in one basket. And that activity, that disturbance is compatible with the habitat. And so that was sort of the key issue here. We were led by biologists of the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources and their collaborators at different research institutions and academic institutions. And the fundamental thing here was human disturbance at this particular site that was politically very difficult to manage and close. So the outcome boiled way down. Target outcome was we need to find a way to get the boat bank closed, public access during certain periods. The board of the South Carolina DNR determined whether they're going to consider that as a rule or an action by agency, and then that would go. If it passes forward, it goes through the South Carolina State Legislature to pass the law, depending on the form of how that regulation is placed. Those two really primary audiences of influence, we learned again through these kind of conversations led by partners that these are in actuality very heavily influenced by public opinion in this matter. So we kind of had this two-pronged approach with different audiences. We needed to build public support. We needed to make that public opinion visible and very clearly known to these key decision-making groups in decision-making contexts, like at that board meeting. Yep, I mentioned these stakeholder partners, and yeah, we needed to then essentially build this up as an opportunity of common ground. Essentially, this is new discovery, exciting, it's all positive, it's sort of undercutting the contentious nature of space use by saying we have this huge thing that flips the argument. So I'll play an excerpt of this short film that we used as part of a package of different things. But this was screened from the museum for a lot of decision makers and local journalists, and was designed to just kind of get people excited that this is happening right here in South Carolina. Just
207. We won't be able to count them much longer because it's just too hard to see them. But you can hear them calling still as they're coming in. There's another group. And another group. Oh my gosh. The entire point all the way to those signs is covered in birds now.
We were all tallying our numbers, and it took quite a while to go through our notes.
64, 175.
I remember I wrote down the numbers from all the parties.
140, 700.
And could not believe it.
65, 400, 750, 207.
Holy moly.
It's a lot of birds.
A lot of whimbrel.
Yeah.
It was about 19,500 birds.
That blew my mind, because that's half, literally half, of estimates of how many whimbrel there are on the Atlantic coast. For all of them to be coming in to roost on this one tiny island, that blew my mind. We've never encountered this many whimbrel in any one spot anywhere else in the world. That is unique. That means that DeVoe is a really special place.
A discovery of this size really seemed impossible. How could there be a half of the estimated population at one place? And personally, in my backyard in South Carolina.
There are certain things that we should refuse to destroy, and those things that we should refuse to destroy, those things that really define us, that make us unique, that bring us together. And in South Carolina, by preserving those places, we have refused to destroy the best part of us. we've created good habitat for Whimbrel to give them a chance, and we just have a responsibility to do what we can to keep them from becoming extinct, because we know that the future of that species is in our hands.
We know how the decline of Whimbrel potentially ends. We know how that story could end. But their population size is still large enough at this moment that we have the time to do something before it's too late.
Seeing thousands of Whimbrel come into roost at night, it kind of just gives you hope that, so many birds exist. It's one of the most phenomenal sights I've ever seen in my life.
I don't think there's anybody that doesn't love a beautiful thing. You don't even have to know what they're called, what the birds are. And you watch them come in on that sunset. And you have to be amazed, you have to be astounded. And you have to be proud to know that that's here.
Spectacle at the bow bank is really a super special thing. Essentially, just to cut to the chase, this ended up coming together really beautifully with the policy outcomes. It's launched at this in-person event that had a lot of that needed to be there was brought there. And then eventually, in sort of a second phase of things, New York Times and CBS Sunday Morning rolled out their version of the work with them, kind of line up their timing, go along with this to lead up to a fall DNR board meeting. And millions of people ultimately learned about this spectacular thing that had been kind of hiding right under their noses, that there's just suddenly a much wider appreciation for how globally unique and sensitive this place actually was. And it fundamentally shifted the calculus among over stakeholders of do we value public access to recreation or so that scale was shifted in favor of closing the boat. So ultimately, that's what happened. Closed seasonally for a couple seasons, and then just it was the years are blending together. I think 2 springs ago they passed through the state legislature to permanently being closed. And this was something that the DNR board had voted unanimously against closing the bow bank prior, and they voted unanimously for it after this sort of groundswell of local public support for this change in decision. So I think it kind of underscored the power of being involved with this process and strategizing with these stakeholders, really in detailed ways guiding us to get this in front of the right people. That was what made this, as Felicia Sanders, who the biologist who discovered this, didn't have a lower third title because this was just an excerpt that cut it out at the beginning. But she's just a hero of this whole story. And yeah, when this all happened, she said that this film and the materials around it were the most effective observation tool that she used in 20 years of observation. So this had been kind of this model for us. This stuff really works when we can get the pieces figured out. There's another short film that I would love to show an excerpt of, and I don't think we've got time, but Drew Lanham, a poet and ornithologist, born and raised in South Carolina. At the very end of that excerpt, we've got a little bit of, we've got a piece that just focuses on his perspectives on this. And a discovery like this means a lot of different things to people. He articulates this in an incredibly powerful way. So I would highly recommend it. Get a chance. We'll find this on YouTube by that title. I'd recommend that a lot. Drew is gem, genius, brilliant words at work. Let's do that excerpt. So unfortunately, okay. So the bow was about habitat loss. This now we're kind of shifting into this unsustainable harvest of hunting. This is about this threat that's facing Whimbrel in particular, but shorebirds in general across a lot of different jurisdictions. Barbados is a very good case of this hunting dilemma. It comes from a range of cultural and socioeconomic drivers and backgrounds. The Barbados case, I just want to preface this film by saying that Barbados, it doesn't really apply to other places in the Caribbean. This is mostly happening in different Caribbean islands and on the northern coast of South America. It's legal in some places, illegal in others, varying bag limits and things like that. But these are all, unsustainable pressures considered as a whole, as a flyway scale for the population, seeing the numbers of them pumping. And yeah, they're all connected as a distributor for the thing. Let's see, Barbados, just really quick context before diving into this next piece. This is on the British historical context. So there are these man-made shooting swamps that were designed as parts of the layout of the sugar plantation in the 1600s and beyond. For these shorebird shooting swamps that have been in business for hundreds of years and maintained and to this day by a very small sort of landowning elite portion of the country. And they are capable of luring in and killing thousands of shorebirds in any given season. At any one food swamp, there are a handful of swamps. This peaked in the mid-20th century, been declining steadily in the last few decades, but this is still ongoing, an active issue. But there are some folks who have really been leading sort of a transformation of this legacy, taking these shooting swamps, turning them into shorebird refuges that are critical on an island that is farthest east of all of these Antilles, all the islands that birds that are even going to stop from here. They'll jet off from the Gulf of Maine or Nova Scotia, make a non-stop flight. They run into a hurricane, they end up on Barbados. Barbados has very little in the way of natural wetlands. These shooting swamps are, extremely effective as shooting swamps historically, but they're also really life habitat. All right, so I'm just going to play this film in its entirety. It's about 60 minutes, so that'll bring us into our time. This has not been seen anywhere yet. It's currently being strictly by these kind of target stakeholders and decision makers that we're working on with these models. And so I'd love to talk more about that as we see this film. All right. Well, thanks for that. Let's see. I think again, in the interest of time, I wanted to just leave the time we can to talk through anything that comes to mind for you all. I just wanted to sort of end on the final thought that I hope, especially for the students in the room, that this has given some perspective on breadth of ways that one would pursue a career between all these, overlapping fields that you're working on here and sampling here, whether it's arts, education, or natural resource management, or complete field research, all these kind of interacting components. And that more generally, I hope you'll understand the value of building partnerships across boundaries to solve some of these problems, both in sort of finding and building the common ground, but working across. So yeah, I think that's. So please.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll be running around the room with the microphone so that everybody can hear the question.
That was a phenomenal presentation.
So I'm wondering, in the world that we live in, given that we are bombarded with videos, bombarded with short videos that are, snappy, attention grabbing, and addictive, how do you balance creating something that is accurate and extensive, but also, you know, uh, kind of a little bit tailored into the fact that we are in fact addicted to our phones and all we want is
Great question. Super relevant and very fun question. I will have to, I have the luxury of working on projects like this. In the role that I've just shifted into at National Audubon, I'll be trying to figure that out and be much more relevant with my role, because I'm having to do a lot more both. We're able to really focus within that meeting. I guess I would say that my first thought is that I think there are still places where this model of like building the in-person relationship where you can kind of create the context outside of the phone addiction that exists, where you have a captive audience and then have the follow-up conversations. I mean, this Barbados film is very much designed for all the people in the film. This is a very small community. All the people in the film are people that be in the room for probably every relative screening of this thing. There's going to be some private, screening decision makers, but they're all part of this. So it's definitely designed for like, a small room of people to see this and then get into the hard conversation. So I think there's a role for it where the only way to compete with the sort of the noise and the speed and the pace of all that other stuff. I think they're probably mutually exclusive in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of really good impactful work you can do with that format. I think topics like this probably need a venue with the space. And so I guess it's just a matter of the only way to compete to be relevant in that is just not raise the, not participate in that exact for attention. Find ways to and opportunities, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, I guess I don't know how much you can go into it, but the specific like intended audience beyond just us, who they are for that film, and then also like the stakeholders and stuff like that. Like, who do you want to be impacted the most? I think.
Yeah. Do you mean this Barbados film or in general? Do you mean this Barbados one or more generally? Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that the target audience for that are a couple of specific decision makers, Prime Minister, Attorney General, and leadership within the Ministry of Environment and Natural Beautification, their sort of environment ministry. I think the real challenge with this story is that as soon as this becomes an open dialogue, two things need to happen at the same time. It's not a matter of ending shorebird hunting, it's a matter of sustaining shooting swamp habitat. End shorebird hunting. We've been assured that if we don't find ways to be very careful with this story and make sure that people are prepared and willing to step in to the bigger picture of wetland management, that those remaining shooting swamps will disappear within a couple of years. The funding's not there. If that sort of recreational social club system disappears overnight in the policy, that's a really good question. I think it's delicate. I think this is one of those cases where we're needing to do our best with the film, bringing curiosity, humility, and empathy to it, so that it's not trying to make it as compatible as possible with that's science led and it's fact based, but it's also there's a lot of room in it to just create the biggest tent possible for those solutions. I guess those are the audiences right now, are the decision makers and the people that are going to be in the immediate vicinity of that dialogue of what are we going to do to sustain this one thing. And what are the actual policy stations, what like, what decisions might be handed down in response to something like this, if it becomes a public issue, which it is fundamentally very much a public issue. But I think I kind of ran. But
Hi. I think that was a really interesting community that you guys found. How did you find these men in Barbados, and how long did you spend with them, and what was the process of maybe not convincing them, but getting them to do this film?
yeah, that's a good question. It's a group of people. It's a very tight knit community. So once you know one or two people, you have access to a lot of them, but it may not be friendly access. There's a lot of faction divisions, and I would say that there's been a lot of research-led initiatives in this space for over a decade. In 2010, there was some data published on those blog books by Canadian Wildlife Service. Fish and Wildlife was around. There were sort of researchers who were tapped into this issue, working with some of the willing swamp owners, share data, talk about silver declines, and this was a dialogue and silver decline of what happened in Barbados, I think, until 2008, 2010. And then we spent about 3.5 weeks there. It's been a long time building some of the initial relationships, and then it was all really needed to be, construct building while we were there. I would say that people that are, as you say, sort of the fine line of, are we convincing people to be part of this? Definitely not, I would say. I think these are clearly people that were ready to they're saying their piece. I think very astutely, just in terms of they're reflective on a lifetime of decision making and accountability, but there's also a sense of what is my place to tell other people and my friends what to do, but here's my account. So I think the people that we talked to and had access to were readily willing and able to be part of this, but they did need to trust that we weren't going to be recording a bunch of stuff, then leaving and hear the public's story with this headline that talked about the number. And yeah, we needed to take a very delicate approach, which we are still in the process.
Okay, so first off, I just want to say that was a really promising method, kind of proposing how to bridge the gap between science and policy in states. We're interested in these policies and national policy, and I part of all UNs, and I'm really interested in kind of helping to bridge this scientific communication. I think it's really important to create a common language, and I really liked how the documentary kind of did that. Another thing is I really liked how you guys showed just not stopping all the swamp is important, but funding for those swamps continuing to be conservation areas. Really interesting. I have a question on how do you kind of create those conversations with the decision makers on to get that video on their desk?
Yeah.
How are those?
Yeah, I think some of this I probably can't speak to at the moment, but a lot of it is direct relationships and individual access. Can someone find a time in a meeting with this person and show an offline version, start a conversation, making sure that that's done in an order that's delicate, that someone over here isn't seeing it before this person sees it. And I would say that's the delicate process that we're in right now.
I think we're going to have to call it quits. We try to stay right on time with the Rock Talk. So I'd like everyone to please give Andy another round of applause for.
Thank you very much.
I think the messages that he had were really important. And I think it's really amazing to see the combination of how exactly you're making communications depending on what you're trying to get out of that process. For those of you that are online or in the room, next week's Rock Talk will be Kyle Horton, who will be talking about birds, an area that has not been explored, the aerospace. So trying to think about birds aloft. And for anybody that's going to be leaving at the end of these two, you're always welcome to join us for Rock Talks every Tuesday night throughout the Shoals season. They are available live, and we also have them on you can watch them later on our YouTube channel. So you're welcome to go and check those out. Thanks again, Andy, and thanks for everyone's attention.